This episode of the Lutheran Cartographer is sponsored by Chrism. Get wonderful gifts, Christmas ornaments, art, and cards at adchrism.com or go to lutherancartographer.com/2020gifts to be taken to their site. The Lutheran Cartographer, episode 44. Welcome to the Lutheran Cartographer, the podcast where we explore what it's like to be Lutheran in different places. I'm your host, Nicholas Weber. Today we are going to Cleveland, Ohio to talk to Theo Kavouras. He is the Cantor of Christ Lutheran Church there in Cleveland. Theo, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So tell us, most people know where Cleveland is, but I personally have a problem of getting Cleveland and Columbus mixed up. Where exactly are we in Ohio?
Sure. Cleveland is northeast in Ohio. We're right on Lake Erie.
Okay.
One of the three big cities. Cleveland, Columbus is in the middle, and Cincinnati's in the southwest.
Okay, good deal. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you've lived, and how you came to Cleveland.
Sure. For most of my life that I can remember, I've lived in the Cleveland area. When I was, I think, about 3 years old, my dad, who's a pastor, took a call to a dual parish in rural Wisconsin. So I only have very faint memories of that, but living in the dairy state, farmland. But no, mostly it's been in Cleveland and the suburbs of Cleveland. I've lived here.
Okay, good deal. So do you remember any of your time of Wisconsin? Is there anything that you'd care to tell our listeners about how you'd compare and contrast where you've been to Cleveland?
Yeah, I mean, definitely I remember that it's a striking difference, the rural Wisconsin, dairy farms versus Cleveland versus metropolis. Again, I was young, but I do remember just wide open spaces, which of course at age 3 or 4 are even wider opener, if you will.
Absolutely.
And I still to this day, if we go anywhere near a farm and there's a barn with horses or cows and I smell it, it just takes me right back there. It's a really cool sensation. And I've been back there as an adult, and it's still very rural.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit more about Cleveland. What would you say are some of the best things about that area?
It's a city that's come a long way, excuse me, in the last probably 10 or 15 years. I've spent time as an Uber driver, so I really got to know some of the spots around Cleveland, that the typically young crowd that takes Uber frequents, and it's come a long way. For instance, one of the great places around here is a neighborhood called Tremont, and 15 years ago, it was a place you wouldn't walk through in the middle of the day with a policeman next to you. And now you can be there at 3 a.m. with your kids and you don't have to worry about a thing. It's fabulous nightlife, restaurants, and it's great.
All right. What are some of the other good things about Cleveland that you'd say that you'd use to sell somebody who might be thinking about moving there?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, of course, we have the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's here in Cleveland, and that's a big attraction. I've taken more people there than I can count back when I was driving Uber. The Great Lakes Science Center, which is right next to it, is a fabulous place to take your kids, or just to go an adult. It's fascinating, the things that they have there. It's a lot like the Cozy Museum in Columbus, if any of you are familiar with that.
Give a little context. I'm not familiar with the Cozy Museum.
Oh, well, right. I guess not everybody would be. The one attraction that I recall most vividly from Cozy, I went there when I was a kid. They have one of those balls with the electricity inside of it, and you put your hand on it and your hair stands up.
Nice.
So just a lot of fun activities like that. And they have those at the Great Lakes Science Center as well. Other than that, I mean, our sports, I'm an Indians fan. We've been lucky to have relevant baseball for the last couple of years, but that's always fun. And, of course, we've got some fantastic restaurants here, too.
Wonderful. We'll talk more about specific ones in a bit. What would you say are some of the most challenging things about being in Cleveland?
Well, I like to say traffic, but I've been to New York and Chicago, so that's not really valid. But, I mean, rush hour can be a bit of a pain in the butt sometimes. Other than that, in the middle, in the dead of winter, it gets pretty bad. Maybe sometimes we can get some snowstorms, especially there's an area of Cleveland called the Snow Belt that gets, like 16 inches at a time and just gets blanketed. But other than that, not a lot to complain about.
All right. So what would you say the culture is like in terms of the religious landscape? What's it like being Lutheran there?
Yeah, there are a fair number of Lutheran churches in Cuyahoga County, which is where Cleveland is located. There are probably 25 or LCMS churches, if not more, a number of ELCA churches. Uh, and, so being a Lutheran it's not difficult. We're lucky. You don't have to drive very far to find a Lutheran parish. Some of them are, I guess, what you might term less confessional than others. But I don't think any of them are off the rails necessarily. So you're lucky anywhere in the county you live, you're probably within 15 or 20 minutes of a Lutheran church. There's a heavy Catholic population in the area, especially in Cleveland, a lot of Irish Catholics, which have been around for generations.
So tell us a little bit more about the general culture. Let's say that you talk to the average person on the street. One of the things that we've been noticing in many of our conversation is how many of the really urban areas are becoming increasingly secularized. Is it like that in Cleveland, or is it more of a kind of typical Midwestern people go to church kind of atmosphere?
I mean, from my point of view, yeah, there's definitely a lot of secularization in the city. I know that Cleveland is considered part of the Midwest, and we do get some of that, all those jokes about the Midwest, excuse me, but I think it is increasingly secularized, unfortunately. Not anything like, a place like San Francisco, say, or New York City. But it's certainly not a wholesome Midwest city in that respect, in my opinion.
I see. What do you think about Ohio being considered part of the Midwest? Do you think that's a fair description? I mean, the Midwest, as many people think of it, as a huge, wide span. Do you think it's more East, Midwest? How would you characterize it in general?
Yeah, I feel like Ohio is kind of just out there. I mean, once you start getting into Pennsylvania, you're almost on the East Coast, but I don't particularly feel like Ohio is really Midwest. Maybe that's just me. I know a lot of people call it the Midwest, but if you go down to any of the smaller cities, any of the farming towns, I mean, you'll see a lot of that stuff that you would think of as the Midwest. And there are some great small towns in Ohio. But I don't know. I guess I wouldn't characterize it as the Midwest. And, I stand against convention there maybe, but so be it.
Fair enough. So now let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about what it's like to raise a family in Cleveland.
Sure. I met my wife, let's see, she's right here. I better answer this quickly. I met my wife about 20 years ago. Yeah, just shy of 20 years ago. And we've lived in the Cleveland area ever since and have had a great time. We homeschooled the children for a while, which was relatively easy, painless, not a lot of hoops to jump through, as it were. And, there's a lot of great, as I said, a lot of great fun family activities, many of them relatively inexpensive, which is good when you have 5 children.
Say a little bit more about that. What kind of activities does the area offer for kids?
Yeah, Cedar Point, which is about an hour and a half from Cleveland, is, I think, a fairly well-known amusement park. It's definitely known within the surrounding states. So that's great. And it's not the only one. We have, we had a SeaWorld here for a long time. They closed down, unfortunately. So those are a couple things. And then I think I mentioned the Science Center. But beyond that, I mean, just parks, bands. They have, get-togethers all over town all summer long. You can just take the kids and sit out on a blanket and just have a great time.
Good deal. What would you say to somebody that has maybe a larger family, 4 or 5 or larger than that? What should they know if they're thinking about moving to Cleveland?
My understanding is that the cost of living here is pretty low, which is a good thing. Again, I can't speak to that personally because I haven't lived as an adult outside of Cleveland. Um, but that's always a plus. And using the stereotype that larger families often, in my experience, like to homeschool, I definitely like Ohio for that because all you have to do is fill out a form and basically you're notifying them. You're not asking permission, so it's really easy. And if you live in the suburbs, it's easy enough to get around, even with a large family.
Okay, good deal. So now let's transition and talk a little bit more about some of the things that you would recommend. If you have a friend coming into town, what would you say? Oh, these are some of the restaurants, a few museums, activities. What would you say? You got to go see this.
Oh yeah, I'm glad you mentioned museums. The Cleveland Museum of Art is free, and I've been there, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, and every time I spend 5 or 6 hours there. It's just full of amazing things. A lot of excellent Reformation era art as well. There's a painting by Louis Cranach the Elder there of Martin Luther, among other things. The Cleveland Orchestra is world renowned, an excellent place to go listen to classical music. Trinity Lutheran Church, which is on the near west side in Cleveland, has an organ called the Becker Organ, which is one of the best in the country, recognized as one of the best in the country, if you like classical music. Excuse me. And restaurants. Well, if you like pizza, there's a place called Edison Pizza in Tremont that it's amazing. You got to try it. That's all I can say. And then we also have quite a few microbreweries in the area, the biggest being Great Lakes Brewery. If you need a good Lutheran beverage, you can go there and get one.
Excellent. So say a little bit more about the art museum. You mentioned that they have Cranach. What other pieces do you think, these are really cool?
Yeah, I wish I could remember all of them. I just, every time I go, it's like being transported into another world, especially the Renaissance era and the religious art, just statuary. The one piece, I don't remember who made it, but and I can't remember the name of it, but it's the one where Mary is holding Jesus in her arms after he's come down from the cross, after he's died.
Nice.
It's really it just transports you to another place.
And the Becker organ that you talked about, is Becker the builder, or is that just the name of the instrument?
It's Becker, I think, is the name of it.
Okay.
Becker organ, and I'm not sure if that's the builder. I would assume it is, but I know that it's like it's a tracker organ for those listeners who know what that is. It's tracker action, and it's got just gigantic pipes. You can go online and look at it. And if you're ever in Cleveland, every Wednesday they do music at the market where they do a free concert on the organ, and you just have to hear it. That's all I can say. I can't describe it.
Well, let's go ahead and tell our listeners about what tracker action is, as opposed to what would the other options be? Pneumatic. Why don't we tell them just a little bit about that? Maybe not a deep dive, but just enough to
Okay.
let them know, like, hey, this is why a tracker organ is cool.
Right. Well, when today's organs that are pipe organs, you push down a key and it trips an electronic relay, and that relay opens a motor, pulls a motor back. The motor pulls a stop back that is covering the pipe. There's always air blowing up through the pipes, but there are stops at the bottom of them so that they don't sound. When you press the key, that pulls back that stop and it makes them sound. Tracker action actually has a wire hooked up from the key to every single stop and pipe, so that when you press it down, you're physically pulling the stop back. One advantage of that is if you can control the pressure that you put on it, you can control how loud the sound is. That takes a lot of skill, something even beyond my talents for sure. I've been playing organ for 25 years, but that's what a tracker organ is.
All right, great. Let's take a moment for a word from our sponsor. Folks, Christmas will be here before we know it, and I'm very excited to tell you about this episode's sponsor, Chrism, who will help you get ready for Christmas. They're a site that sells wonderful, robustly Lutheran gifts, art, Christmas ornaments, and cards. So if you're preparing to send off a salvo of Christmas cards, check out Chrism. You won't find the smarmy, saccharine, overly sweet cards. You'll just find wonderfully and richly biblical cards with beautiful art. They just sent me some of their latest cards, and they are fantastic. They also sent some of their new pewter ornaments, and these things are wonderful. They have a nice heft to them. They're well made, good quality, and they will make wonderful gifts or to hang on your own Christmas tree. So check it out at adcrucem.com. That's adcrucem.com, or go to lutherancartographer.com/2020gifts to be taken right to their website. Check it out, Chrism. Let's get back to our guest. So now let's transition and talk a little bit more about your vocation. You're the cantor at Christ Lutheran. What would you say are some of the things that our listeners should know in terms of how they can support their cantor and why the role of the cantor is important in the church?
Yeah. The music and the Lutheran Church and the divine service and music in the Lutheran Church are virtually inseparable. Of course, divine service consists of the word and sacraments, and you can't have them without music, and obviously they're perfectly valid, but without music, church is just, I don't even know what to call it. I believe Martin Luther said that music is, I can't remember the quote. There's a good Luther quote on it. Go look it up. You know how to Google, guys. But as a cantor, what I do is I chant the introit responsively with the congregation. I chant the gradual in between the two readings, and then the Alleluia verse before the gospel. And, it's proclaiming the word of God. It's important to do. And the fact that it's chanted elevates it. Chanting is not singing. It's elevated speech. And anything you can add to the service that involves all five senses in the Lutheran tradition is a good thing, because the divine service is incarnational. It's not in your head. It's not about what you think. It's not about where you are. Well, it is about where you are. It's incarnational. It's the smells, the sights, the tastes, the words, everything.
It's an integrated experience. It's not merely in one's head.
Right.
Okay.
Not notional.
All right. So now let's go to that second part of the question. What would you say are some things that listeners, if they're Lutheran church members, how can they support their cantor and their musicians at their church?
The obvious thing is pay them. Unfortunately, I know a lot of churches are not in a position to pay appropriately, and it is what it is. But there are also a lot of churches that take advantage of the fact, I shouldn't say a lot, there are some churches that take advantage of the fact that they have volunteer musicians and they pay them, not great wages. Other than that, just even talking to them, hey, thank you, I appreciate what you're doing. I get that every Sunday, mostly from my organ playing, and every time I hear it, I love it. It makes me glad to go there and to do that. That's actually probably the biggest thing, is just saying, hey, thank you, I appreciate it.
I see. Do you also direct choirs?
I do not currently. I used to be a choir director at Bethlehem Lutheran Church in Parma. I was the music director, choir director, and organist. But currently, actually, my mom directs the choir. All I do is accompany. All
right. Good deal. So now let's talk a little bit more about something that's unique to this time, and I hope by the time our listeners hear this, that wherever they are, it will go away, but probably hasn't at this time, and that is the response to the coronavirus. What has Ohio done, and Cleveland in particular? Some states are very draconian in their approach. I haven't heard much about Ohio. I haven't been following Ohio closely. What is it like there?
I got to tell you, it's pretty bad. Governor DeWine, frankly, in my opinion, is just a tyrant at this point. Even the data on the state's website has showed that despite testing going up, deaths and cases are going down, and he just continues to impose more orders. And I think, quite frankly, he just doesn't want to say out loud that he's wrong. Either that, or like the little sinner in all of us, he's enjoying being the tyrant. And let's not forget that we can all take pleasure in that. So he's certainly not alone there. As far as orders, there's a mandatory mask order everywhere, unless you're outside or social distancing. Bars have to close at 10 o'clock because the coronavirus comes out at 10:01. Other than that, just the typical stuff. Most of it is honestly enforced by the businesses. They put signs up and don't let people in without masks.
I see. How has it affected your church?
We closed right at the beginning when there was the shutdown order back in March. We were unfortunately closed for 2 weeks. And then we reopened initially holding 3 services with quote unquote reservations, limiting to 10 people. And we quickly started to see that not only was this overblown, but the church the church doesn't respond to the world like that. And so by, I think the 3rd Sunday of Easter, we were open with no restrictions. People were and still are welcome to wear a mask if they choose to do so. Nobody's going to, pick on them for that, but it's not required. Unfortunately, the only remaining thing is that we're still using intinction instead of the common cup, which personally I miss. But I can understand that some people are reticent to do so.
I see. Okay. What are some of the things that we haven't talked about Cleveland that you'd really like to make sure that we tell the listeners before we move on to closing questions?
Sure. Make sure you visit Lakeview Cemetery. President Garfield and his wife are buried there. And it was back in the 19th century it opened. And there are a lot of the, quote unquote, rich fat cats from the steel era, Rockefellers and such that are buried there. It's also just absolutely gorgeous. There are a number of great statues of angels there. A really big chapel. I highly recommend it.
Good deal. All right. So now as we start to close out the podcast, I want to make sure to give you the opportunity to tell our listeners about the things that you'd like to. Where would you like to point our listeners? Your church's website. I believe you have a blog that you have people contributing to. What would you like to tell our listeners about?
Yeah, definitely check out our website. The sermons are all posted there. And you can contact the pastor if you who can't use more sermons in their life. You can be added onto the email list. It's ChristLutheranCleveland.org. As far as my blog, I have a website called the Snarky Lutheran. We maintain a blog as well as sell some snarky products. Such my favorite one so far is Your Face Reminds Me of God's Grace, Resistible. But mostly it's a blog where we have guest authors. And if any of your listeners are interested in writing, please use the contact form. I'm always looking for guest authors. As long as you can write from a theologically sound perspective, whatever subject you want, we'd love to hear about.
Good deal. Tell us a little bit more about the Snarky Lutheran. What is you mentioned as long as it's theologically sound, you'll publish it. What is your general approach, or what sort of topics do you like to see written about?
Really anything that strikes the writer's interest. We've had everything from, straight satire pieces. One was titled Nadia Bolz-Weber Wins the Heretic Triple Crown. From there to, we have an Anglican Catholic monk, if you can believe that, who wrote a piece talking about why abortion is the travesty that it is, and everything in between. Anything that catches your interest. We've even had a blog about magic mushrooms, believe it or not.
All right.
Really anything.
Going
and
for the whole
by the
gamut.
way, the one of the goals of the website is that every sale, a portion of it is donated to the Seminary Guild, which supports students at the Fort Wayne Seminary.
That's fantastic. Theo, thank you so much for your time today. What are your parting thoughts for our listeners?
Be strong and courageous. I think that's very important to remember. And just whenever I get down, especially with this current situation, just repeating the Kyrie to oneself is unbelievably powerful. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, have mercy.
Amen. Thank you again. God's peace.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for listening to the Lutheran Cartographer. For more about the things that we talked about today, check out the show notes page at lutherancartographer.com/44. I encourage you to check out the sponsor of today's episode, Chrism. I'm really excited to have them as a sponsor. You can find wonderful gifts, Christmas ornaments, posters, cards, all sorts of wonderful things over at adcrucem.com, adcrucem.com, or go to lutherancartographer.com/2020gifts to go ahead and be directed to their website. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Lutheran Cartographer by subscribing on iTunes or on Stitcher. While you're there, I would appreciate it if you would leave a rating and a review so that more people will see and hear these episodes. I'm Nicholas Weber. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.